So, you want to be a real estate investor, but where do you start? How do you know what information and sources to trust? That's where I come in. I'm Jonny Cattani, and this is the Investor Relations Real Estate Podcast. Hey guys, real quick, before we start, go to investwithcattani.com and download my free ebook, Is Commercial Real Estate Recession Proof? Now to today's show. What's up, guys? And welcome to another episode of the Investor Relations Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Jonny Cattani, and I'm joined today by Jefferson Lilly. Jefferson is a mobile home park investment expert and educator. He is the founder of Park Avenue Partners, private equity real estate fund that acquires and operates mobile home parks nationwide. His investment funds are returning 10 to 15% IRRs to limited partners, both personally and through his partnerships. Jefferson has acquired 31 mobile home parks in 15 states since 2007, totaling over $71 million in value. He started the industry's first mobile home park podcast and the largest group on LinkedIn dedicated to investing in mobile home parks. Jefferson, welcome to the show.
Jonathan, great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Very excited. As I was mentioning offline, we haven't had an episode dedicated to mobile home parks. It's not as sexy as apartments, but
let's go trailer.
Subjective.
Let's get trashy today. Trailer trashy. We'll see.
Honestly,
where this goes.
That's subjective because personally, I love any asset that can return great returns to its investors. But let's kind of go back to the beginning, like we do with all of our guests. Tell us, where you started and how you got into this.
Well, as I say, Jonathan, when I woke up after the concussion, it just seemed like a good idea to buy a mobile home park. But seriously, so I got into the business back in 2007, now about 15 years ago. I had spent the preceding 10 years, so basically going back to about the turn of the century, working in high tech. I went through the dot-com boom and bust and semi-resurgence. I saw at least the paper, value of my stock options gyrate wildly, and the publicly traded stock of many tech companies on the NASDAQ very widely. And I basically thought, maybe I should have some passive income, something stable to kind of even out the ups and downs of tech investing. So honestly, I thought, well, I'm going to try, to my limited ability, try and follow Warren Buffett's advice, stay within my circle of competence. And I just sort of figured, I'd always lived in a house or an apartment building, and therefore that must be my circle of competence. I certainly didn't know anything about office properties or senior living or restaurant real estate or what have you. So I started looking initially like on LoopNet. And I live out here in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. I knew even then I was not going to find cash flow in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I was already looking on LoopNet for apartments, multifamily, out in, Peoria, Illinois, and Lubbock, Texas, and Ames, Iowa, and the great Midwest. And again, this goes back now actually to about 2005. And I would see 99 apartment buildings in Ames, Iowa at an 8 cap. This was 2005 pricing. And then I would see like one mobile home park that was like a 10 cap. And I thought, that's absurd. I'm not buying a friggin' trailer park. Are you kidding? And I deleted the search. I did it again in, Lubbock, Texas, and Madison, Wisconsin, and on and on. And I finally got hit over the head, 5 or 10 times with this sort of 1 in 100 quirky multifamily asset that seemed to pay more money, right? Higher cap rate. So then I looked into it, and it clicked pretty quickly why this is a better asset class than apartments. I think it's the best asset class out there. We can get into that on your show.
Not that you're biased or anything.
Yeah, right. I certainly wasn't at the time.
Fair.
I was perfectly fine thinking I'd buy an apartment. Yeah, right. Well, yeah. So anyway, so I then kind of built up an unofficial advisory board of about 10 guys. Some of those I found online. Some of them I found just like, in person, as it were. One guy who went to my church, I just mentioned like, hey, I'm thinking of buying a mobile home park. And he said, "Oh, my dad used to own one of those. And that was what sent our whole family to Europe for a great summer vacation when I was a kid. Here's my
Nice.
dad's number. Give him a call." So I had about 10 guys to bounce deals off of. I don't know about you, but I certainly can and do learn through book learning. But I really accelerate my learning and learn best when I'm doing, or at least when I'm talking to somebody that has done what I want to learn how to do. So having that advisory board was great, and I would bounce ideas off them. It took me then from about late '05 to early '07, took about 16, 17 months for me to first like have it click that this was a good niche, to then find the deal and actually close on it. And I was still working my day job in high tech. I obviously find deals a little more quickly now than one every 16 or 17 months. But at the time, again, I was just doing this, thinking about getting into it, doing it part-time, still working my day job. But nevertheless, 16, 17 months later, I owned that first park. I own it to this day. And I bought 30 some odd others, as you mentioned.
Wow. That's awesome. And I love how it just kind of kept showing its face, and you're ignoring it, and finally like, okay, I can't ignore this anymore.
Right. That was it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So let's get trashy about it. Let's get trailer parky about it. I love it. So my first question is, you started in '07, and then obviously we had the Great Recession. What happened to that asset class during that? Was it affected at all?
That's a great question. So at the time, I obviously had to live right through it. I had closed that first park out in Oklahoma City in March of '07. And basically by the following summer, a little over a year later, the wheels were coming off the economy. It was the housing recession, '08 and '09. And, I was kind of bracing for my manager to maybe say, someday like, "Hey, a third of the people haven't paid rent this month." But fortunately, that really didn't happen. Um, we stayed sort of 95 to 100% full right through the housing recession. We bumped rents off a very low base, $110. We bumped them up to about 155. So percentage wise, that was a huge increase, 50% something in 45% increase. It was only about $45. But we bumped rents. We kept our occupancy full. I actually started buying used mobile homes and bringing them in during that time period. That's a great way to improve cash flow. It ain't easy work, but if you can find homes, get them in. At the time, I was my own general contractor, overseeing the crews that were doing the new plumbing and the new roof and the paint and sheetrock. I now have hired people to do that. But at the time, I was out in one of my used mobile homes, living on site about 1 out of every 3 weeks, overseeing the crews that were doing the work. Anyway, so that was kind of how I got my start. I ended up, I still had my day job for about the first year, '07 and into '08, but by late '08, I had left high tech and was just working on this, my mobile home park, full time, again, living on site about 1 out of every 3 weeks. Frankly, that last startup wasn't doing real well, and I could see that my mobile home park was doing reasonably well. And I was, while I was still working my day job, I was putting almost no time or money into my park. So I switched over, started doing it full time. So ended up buying another park. Those first couple were all mine. Since then, now I've raised capital from 220 or so individuals and bought, I think actually now about 36 mobile home parks.
Wow. That's awesome. And I love, obviously you're hands-on very, very much in the beginning. The irony is that these homes are really actually pretty nice. There was a time in my life when I was a residential real estate agent, and I showed a few, and they're actually very nice, very comfortable to live in.
Yeah.
Which I love. And they provide obviously very nice housing for people. So let's kind of get into there's a few things I want to talk about. First thing is kind of the structure of how a mobile home park operates. If I understand, there's different ways, like sometimes you just own the pad, other times you may own the whole thing. So kind of get into that.
Yeah, so there are sort of two different business models. One is that you just own the land, and you make this much more like a parking lot business. That's the model we favor. Other operators favor owning those mobile homes and renting them out, which does get you more cash flow. As you can imagine, when it's up to you as a landlord to maintain those proverbial leaky toilets and leaky roofs, you've got a lot more time and money, a lot more operational complexity involved than when you don't have leaky toilets and leaky roofs to maintain. When we bring in homes, as I mentioned, I started doing back in late 08 and 09, we put those homes out on rent to own agreements. So we want to build communities of owners, not of renters. We want to help people get out of the game of paying rent forever and become a home owner. And generally we can help folks, again, become a home owner for less money than they were paying in an apartment in that market. So it's a win for them. It's a win for us. Again, reduced maintenance. We're certainly a for-profit partnership here at Park Avenue, but we also have a social mission, and it's just wonderful when we can help people stop paying more money in rent in an apartment, and they're just wasting that, and help them actually build up some amount of equity in a mobile home that they're going to own. Might not be as nice of a house and appreciate as well as your house or my house, but if your only other option is being in an apartment to save money and be building up equity in a mobile home, if that's your only other option, that's a much better financial option than remaining a renter.
Absolutely. I love that. That's a great mission to have and a great goal. So if I understand correctly, then it's almost sort of like triple net-ish, where you just own the land, they basically take care of everything else.
That's the plan. We really expect them, again, to not only take care of their home, the toilets, the roofs, the windows, the heater, the air conditioning, et cetera. We also expect them to mow their lawn. And that, well, having a lawn is a big plus, right? If you're an apartment, you don't typically have your own dedicated space to, for instance, fence in and have a pet or a child maybe running around in that fenced in area. So in almost all of our parks, again, we expect the residents to maintain their lawn. We still take care of the trees and anything basically that you'd have to get up on a ladder, i.e. incur liability, but taller things on the property we take care of. But we do expect them to mow the lawns, take care of shrubs. Again, it's a win for them to have that space dedicated just for their family. That's not something you usually get in an apartment complex.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
And that's nice that they can have that like sort of home feeling, some land, all of that, more space, which I'm a huge proponent of.
Yeah.
So if I understand, the barrier to entry a little bit lower than apartments in that as well. So kind of talk about that, and ultimately being able to manage, do you use on-site managers, or is a lot of this stuff automated?
Yeah. So we use on-site managers. Maybe a better term is local. So perhaps half of our managers are actually on site, they're residents that live in the community. But the other half would be local to the town. We tend to like for folks to be not more than about a 10-minute drive. And frankly, we tend to not buy parks in huge metros. Chicago and Dallas and whatnot. We're buying in places like Sioux City and Roswell, New Mexico, Pocatello, Idaho. Long story short, the town might only be 10 minutes wide, or a little more.
Right.
But anyway, we look for somebody to either live in the park or close by. And those managers then are responsible for collecting the rents, although we've migrated almost everybody to do that online. But they will still have to post late notices and unfortunately process the occasional eviction. That's a very small percentage of our tenants that can't bring themselves to pay the rent. But they would process that. They mostly focus on maintaining the curb appeal, making sure that the residents are, for instance, mowing their lawns. And they then also oversee somebody to come and mow the common area lawns. Some of our parks have playgrounds and things like that. And then they also focus on selling homes. So we typically invest certainly 5 and often 6 figures into the mobile home parks that we buy. That money, a typical park, for instance, might come with 5 to 10 abandoned mobile homes that a previous mom and pop that wasn't a great operator, they just haven't fixed up. So that's typically a 10 grand expense per home. So that right there might be 50 to 100,000 getting those homes fixed up and back into the home ownership pool. They're just sitting there unused. And then we will buy brand new homes. Those are typically a $60,000 to $70,000 expense. And most of our parks need, say another 5 to 10 brand new mobile homes brought in. So we actually and actively expand the supply of affordable housing. Anyway, so that's what our managers also focus on. It's a bit of collecting the rents, mostly maintaining curb appeal, and then actually expanding the supply of affordable housing.
That's awesome. It makes perfect sense. It's much like with self-storage, which is an asset class that I'm really getting into. Same concept, right? In terms of having someone on site or close by. You don't always need them right there, but having them close by, that proximity. So what is it like moving these things? Do you ever have to, if someone, I guess, owns it, then if they move, do they move it with them? What does that whole process kind of look like?
So that's one of the things that makes this, we feel, a really terrific asset class. Residents do own their mobile homes. They, of course, have to maintain those. And if they wanted to move a mobile home, then they would be burdened with that expense, which for an in-town move in most metros would be a $5,000 expense. You've got to not only move it, you've got to first break it off the land, as it were. It's probably augured into the ground with augers about 3 feet long. You've got to break all the water, sewer, electric connections. Those are permanent connections, just like all the same pipes and wiring used in a site-built house. So just to call it out, these are not RVs. They don't have an engine in them. They're not like a Winnebago. You can't just drive it off. So with a $5,000 burden there to move a house, most of our residents will leave it in place if they have to move cross town or even cross country. They'll leave that home in place. They'll sell it to a new resident. And then that new resident picks up paying us the lot rent where the previous resident left off.
Got it. Okay. That makes perfect sense. And I assume some of the strategy as well is expanding, adding more spots and potentially.
We do that. Yes, sometimes. Generally, we're more focused on infilling the existing vacant lots. Government inadvertently really is doing all that it can to suppress affordable housing and to stop the expansion of mobile home parks. So, for instance, a typical response from government when we say, hey, we've got room to build on another 20 or 50 affordable housing units, is they say, well, then you have to bring the old original part of your park up to the current standards, which typically mean much wider roads and much lower density. So what all of that means is we would have to kick out existing residents in order to bring the original part of the park up to current standards. And again, then what we would be building would be much lower density. There's no fire code reason for that. There's no health and safety issue. It's just that unfortunately most governments really don't want lower income folks in their town, and they pass all these over the last 30 to 40 years. They passed all these onerous regulations that make it very difficult to expand a park or construct a new one. But at least that does have the benefit of, if you're in the business, you'll never have any more competition than you do on day one. Almost certainly nobody will be building a new mobile home park across the street and competing. Whereas that does still happen with apartments and self-storage and hotel and other asset classes. So
interesting. Okay. Wow. What a fascinating concept that in one breath, our government is trying to take care of lower income people, but in the other breath is getting in the way of that exact thing happening.
yeah, politicians on both sides of the aisle talk out of both sides of their mouth, and they all say, oh, we'd never discriminate against the poor. We love lower income folks. Then they just say, well, not in my backyard. We're not going to have any of those people here. Again, where I got started in Oklahoma, on the south side of Oklahoma City, a little town called Slaughterville, they passed a regulation that any new mobile home parks would have to have 2.5 acres of land wrapped around each mobile home. Now, normal density per acre would be 10 homes. So normally, if you had 2 acres of land, you'd have a 25 unit mobile home park. So with their new lower density requirements, they can say that they have not outlawed mobile home parks, and to the letter of the law, indeed, they have not outlawed them. But by increasing the land costs 25 times, and frankly, most of the rest of the costs, you think about all the pipes and roads that you would have to stretch so much farther between homes, so much farther apart. With that sort of density, you've really increased probably most all of your expenses, the pavement, the pipes, the land. You've probably increased almost all your construction costs by about 25 times.
Okay.
So it's just not affordable. That town will never see any more apartments built either. And unfortunately, most every city and county nationwide has enacted somewhat similar density requirements, or done other. The one town where we're active in Iowa enacted a law that, at least on private land, the minimum width of a wall of a house would have to be 20 feet. The implication, that sounds fine, but the implication is, well, the widest affordable single wide mobile homes would be 18 feet, most of them 16. This town requires that external walls be at least 20 feet, which means you'd have to bring on a double wide, which is twice the expense, and maybe more than twice to get it moved and bumped back together. So you see a lot of these sorts of regulations that really are a war on the poor. So there just really aren't affordable housing options being built anymore. Most mobile home parks were built between the 60s and 80s. And the amount of construction has dropped off precipitously over the last roughly 30 years. So we're doing our best to fight government and to bring in houses. It's very difficult to add on to our parks or to develop a new one. but we do what we can, and we typically work with what we've got, and we're bringing in homes onto those already constructed pads.
Wow, that is fascinating. What an interesting sort of concept. So I guess they're hoping that magically home prices go down for single family homes, or
They have no plan.
that's fair. Yeah,
There's no plan to provide for lower income folks, unfortunately.
Is
So
the
yeah.
zoning the same? Like these plots of land, like if they're zoned for multifamily, does that also mean that you could, in theory, I guess, put a mobile home park there? Is it considered multifamily?
It is generally. My understanding is some places, though, have specifically changed zoning to say multifamily apartment. So you could not do multifamily mobile home. But that does vary city to city, county to county.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. So one thing I want to talk about is I really want to talk about this fund. I'm a big fan of funds, and as someone who's potentially going to start doing that, I'm more of a single asset fund guy, but you obviously have this fund now. You know, how did that come about? What's the strategy behind that, and kind of the entry and all of that?
So when I got started raising outside capital, which was late 13, that my former partner and I started that. We then raised money and closed on a deal in the middle of 14. But we did that one just as a standalone deal. We then did 2 more deals just as standalone deals in 14. Then in 2015, we raised our first fund. So I did 2 funds with that partner, and I've now done 2 on my own under the Park Avenue Partners branding. So we like funds for a couple of reasons. First, we then know how much money we've got in the bank and roughly how many parks we can go and buy. It also gives us the opportunity to close on a park quite quickly for all cash. So we've done that sometimes within about 30 days. We don't need an appraisal. We'll probably look at an older survey. We'll still get a phase 1 done to make sure there's no environmental concern. But if we're closing all cash, we know what the property's worth. Again, we don't need an appraisal. We can just go ahead and get deals done in about 30 days. We're working on one such deal now that we anticipate will close in about 30 days from now. So the fund lets us know how many parks to go looking for, and we can close for all cash. And that typically means we can negotiate a somewhat better price because we can make an offer that has no financing contingency. Plus, it's a quick close. So we like the funds. We think it benefits investors. They then, it would be highly, all right, so investors then will get a diversified investment. We specialize in mobile home parks, but as you pointed out, we bought cumulatively in about 15 different states. So investors will almost certainly end up with parks in any given fund, parks in many different states. So that gives them geographic diversification. Heaven forbid, if something goes wrong with the economy in Texas, that's not likely to impact what goes on in Alaska. We do own a park up there.
Wow.
Or what's going on in Iowa. So our investors get geographic diversification, a focused investment in mobile home parks, but geographic diversification. And it also means it's a lot less likely that we'd ever have to go back to them for a capital call. This has never happened, but it is more common with deal by deals. If there's some natural disaster or some big problem, say with private utilities, sometimes you just don't have enough capital to fix the problem and you have to go back to your investors. So that's not impossible with a fund, but simply because we keep reserves in the bank and we have so much cash flow from all the other properties, it's highly unlikely we would ever have to make a capital call to one of our or to all of our investors. So that's another win for investors to invest in a fund.
Awesome. I love that. And are you guys vertically integrated with your property management as well?
Yes, both deal sourcing and property management. We are vertically integrated. As I mentioned earlier, we're rehabbing homes. We're also buying brand new homes out of the factory, moving them in. That typically requires that you get a dealer's license. Frankly, the mobile homes have a VIN number just like an automobile. They trade through the DMV. Auto dealers are licensed. Mobile home dealers are licensed. Long story short, there are really no traditional property management companies that really get it. The existing multifamily property management companies that are out there are used to managing apartment complexes, maybe a package of single family houses, but they have no experience sitting for a test, becoming a licensed mobile home dealer. They have really no idea what to look for when they might buy either a new mobile home or a used mobile home to bring in. They have no experience figuring out who is the right mobile home mover or who the right person is to do the skirting and utility connections. So long story short, the best we've seen, and I have used 3, and I should not have used more than one, but I tried this 3 times with a large, a medium, and a small outside property management company. All 3 were disappointing. So I guess my perspective is that they can just flatline a property. They can collect the rents. They can schedule minor maintenance. But most of the properties we buy really need to have capital and time and some skill invested in them to increase occupancy. And that's not something that, a traditional property manager would really have any skills or interest in doing. So yeah, we keep it all in-house. That all reports into me, for better and for worse. The buck stops with me for property management.
Nice. Love that. Sounds like you probably had to learn some lessons the hard way, though, to kind of figure
I
that
did.
out as we all do. Anything else you kind of had to learn the hard way in terms of these parks and operations?
It's pretty key to really scale your tech. So when I got started, and indeed that was back in 2007, people didn't have too many cell phones and weren't really, certainly I don't think any of the cell phones like had a camera to take photos or do a recording. But some of the mistakes that I made were to do my own books using QuickBooks, and to just keep track of things on a spreadsheet myself. So I've now hired people to do that, and we actually use software called Rent Manager, and there's certainly many good ones. That's the one that we use. That enables, for instance, tenants now to pay online. So all of our properties now have a website. They can pay online, and it again not only deposits the money directly into our account, it also updates the rent roll to show who has paid. So we're no longer having to reconcile and look at a check from a bank account and digitally flip it over online and see who actually paid us. It almost all the payments come in an electronic fashion. Plus, as I alluded, we're now having our managers use their own cell phones and snap a photo of, say, a problem house. I can say, go and take a video or go snap photos. I know the house on lot 23 had all the junk in the yard. Did you, the manager, get it cleaned up? Go out, take a photo, do a drive-by with the video, go all the way through the whole park with the camera sticking out the window of your car. Let me see what the park looks like. So we use tech that way, and signing our leases online, and they get stored digitally. And now there's no longer a situation with like a manager with a box of leases out in Ohio that just poof up and disappears on us one day, and like, where did all the signed leases go? They were signed digitally and they're up in Rent Manager. So that's a great database for us to have. So anyway, those are some ways we use tech now that I couldn't have even imagined back in 2007.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I had a flip phone back then, and I don't know.
Yep.
I mean, if it had a
Little
camera, it
Motorola
looked,
StarTAC, that was my favorite little
yeah, probably had like actually no, my first phone back then did not have a camera. But even if it did, it was so grainy. It was like those CCTV cameras. You wouldn't even know what was going on anyway.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
technology has come a long way, and it's great that we can leverage that same kind of thing in self-storage, right?
Yeah.
Go online, automated, get a code. You don't really need someone to be on site, which is really nice, kind of leveraging that. So kind of talk about that transition, from on site and having to kind of work in the business, and now you can actually work on the business. And is it possible to get into this asset class without having to be hands-on like you were?
It certainly is. I don't know that I would advise it. Well, if you really don't want to be hands-on, then the right answer is for you to invest in a fund and be a limited partner. But if you want to really operate a business, obviously I'm not sleeping 1/3 of my time in my parks anymore, but that was still an invaluable experience to have. And keeping my own books on QuickBooks for about the first 4 months that I was in the business. And I used to answer most of the tenant calls and place my own ads. Back then it was mostly Craigslist, not so much Facebook. But yeah, so I think that was a great way to cut my teeth. And yeah, the tech might be a little different now, but I'd still very much encourage anybody considering getting into the business to encourage them to actually go on site and really see their property, be in it, meet some of your residents, see what it's like finding a crew to rehab a house, see what it's like collecting rent, see what it's like to try and find a different crew or person to actually show up regularly and cut the grass, that kind of thing.
Awesome. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. I appreciate that insight. So we are kind of coming up on time, but I've got 5 questions that I ask all my guests. It's the final 5. Yes. First question is, what's the best advice you've gotten from a mentor?
Probably to get other additional mentors and really have a deep bucket of people to draw from to ask questions, and to scale and just hire other people to come in and do the day-to-day stuff that I was doing, no matter what your niche is, no matter what the business is. If you don't hire other people to do what you do, you're not going to be able to grow.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's universal for sure. What is it about your career that makes you feel like you're fulfilling your why?
2 things. So we are both, again, focused on expanding the supply of affordable housing. That is a good, noble social mission to have. Working for myself, though, also enables me to spend a lot of time with my family, or to have the flexibility to travel. So we're just back a couple of weeks ago, for instance, from going on an RV trip to one of our combined RV and mobile home park properties down near South Padre Island in Texas. So we homeschool our kids, and I work from home. And so having this sort of entrepreneurial real estate career, again, coupled with us homeschooling our kids, enables our whole family to just pick up and go for a week or 2 and homeschool the kids in the mornings in the RV, and then be out in the swimming pool or talking with residents or living the RV life in the afternoon. So having that kind of flexibility to be with my family is awesome.
Awesome. I love that. Being able, just kind of having that freedom. And I love that you homeschool too. Was that even pre-COVID? You guys were doing that?
Yeah, we were homeschooling since before homeschooling was cool.
Yeah, it was definitely not right. When I was in school. Those were the odd ducks. The irony is my view on that has completely shifted, and I absolutely will homeschool my kids.
There you go. Good. You
So-
can call me, or I'll have you and your wife talk to my wife. She does 99% of it. But yeah, it's a great way to spend more time with your kids and really have a richer family life. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, and teach a little bit more of how to think instead of what to think as well. I think is super important.
Yep. That's
awesome. Favorite non-real estate or investment related book?
Sorry, non-real estate and not investment related.
Right. So yeah, it could be business, self-help, nonfiction. Fiction.
Yeah. So most of what I read is business related.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of Snowball. That is what I think is the best biography on Warren Buffett. It does not just talk about how he got his start and how and why he invests, although that's a big part of the book, but it also, I think, has a fairly candid look at his personal life. And my take is he was not the world's best dad. He was quite consumed with work. He was quite passionate about it. That was what he loved to do, at least as much as being a dad. But I think the book highlights some of the trade-offs that he made, sacrificing some family aspects so that he could spend more time managing his money. So we've all got to ultimately make that decision, how much personal time, how much professional time. And I think that book highlights how Warren drew the line for better or for worse, and what the consequences were for his decision-making around his family. So highly recommend Snowball.
Interesting. I will definitely add that to the list. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
How about the superpower of flying?
Yes.
Seems like a lot of fun to be like Superman and just zip around.
That is.
And then I would never have to be on another airline and deal with all the masks and rude flight attendants and cramped little seats. And I'd never have to be on an airplane again if I could fly myself. That would be great.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And being able to just get to places quickly, not having to go through TSA and but fun fact, masks have now been lifted by the FAA. So we are
just
maskless.
A couple of days ago. Yeah, we're traveling tomorrow without them.
Same.
Although I hear the Biden administration is looking to sue to make us all wear masks again. So who knows? Maybe by next Monday, we'll have to wear masks again. I don't know.
Yeah. And then, of course, you're going to have people still wearing masks, and then they're going to look at
That's their business. Yeah, I'm not going to have a law prohibiting masks
the whole time.
Why not just have individual liberty? But don't get me on my political soapbox. I'm sure not everybody agrees with me. Inexplicably, not everybody sees the world the way I do, but so be it.
Right. They're wrong, but that's okay.
It is okay. Yes.
Awesome. Yeah. And last question: what's the best way for people to get a hold of you and learn more?
So find us on our website, parkavenuepartners.com. You can join our mailing list. There's a link at the top. And I believe at the bottom of that homepage is an intake form if you want to just put in your name and contact information and ask a question or what have you. So that's pretty good. I will also mention, if you're interested in mobile home parks, perhaps more generally, potentially owning and operating, you can go to our mobilehomeparkinvestors.com website. That website in turn links you through to our LinkedIn group, where we've got about 6,500 members just trading tips and tricks on operating mobile home parks. That also takes you to our podcast, the Mobile Home Park Investors Podcast, which I started with my former partner now 4 or 5 years ago. Was the industry's first. And that also takes you to the corporate calendar, which you can download into your phone, which has trade shows, industry trade shows, and other such things. So mobilehomeparkinvestors.com or parkavenuepartners.com.
Awesome. I love it. We'll link those in the show notes, make it super easy. Jefferson, Thank you so much for all of your insight and your time.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching today's episode. I hope you really enjoyed it. Listen, I know it's cliche and you hear it all the time, but please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you know when the next video is coming out. Even though this is technically a daily podcast, you know it's coming out the next day. We have a ton of content coming your way. So please like and subscribe. It helps a ton. Leave comments. Would love to know what you guys think. And we will see you on the next one. Thanks so much.